Some of the hardest problems in the world exist far above the planet. Our job? To launch the smartest solutions, to protect our satellites, clean up our clutter, to propel breakthroughs in propulsion, to learn more about our place in the universe, to outpace emerging threats. Every day, the Aerospace Corporation uses the latest technologies to ensure our nation's safety and leadership in space.
Hi, and welcome to the Space Policy Show. We have a great episode for you today. Before I get started, I want to remind you can find us on Twitter at # the Space Policy Show, or you can ask our experts questions on Vimeo, or just join the chat. You can also sign up for our latest news alerts at aerospace.org/policy. Today's episode is on evolving STEM education with Lael Woods, David Mayo, Bruce Janousek, Heydy Arias, and Ashley Carpenter. We're so excited to have them on our show. Dr. Lael Woods is the System Director of iLab Innovation Programs. She and her team work with the government and aerospace staff across the corporation in creating programs that collaborate and explore innovative ideas, which sounds pretty cool. She has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Cornell, a master's and PhD in applied mathematics from Northwestern. David Mayo works in the Systems Engineering Office at Aerospace Corporation. He grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama, and served 6 years in the Marine Corps. David attended VMI for his Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering and in the University of Alabama in Huntsville for his MSc in Aerospace Engineering. I won't hold that against you because I went to the University of Oklahoma. He received his PhD in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Maryland, College Park. Fun facts about David: he enjoys riding his motorcycle, fitness, playing the trumpet, and mentoring students. We definitely have that in common, except I don't know how to play the trumpet. I'm not very musically inclined. I wish I was. Our third guest, Bruce Janicek, joined Aerospace in 1979 and has worked in the physical sciences laboratories most of his career. His current position is in the Corporate Strategy Office as a retiree casual, where he leads a team of early career employees in writing corporate value vignettes. He's also held the position of fourth grade science teacher at a public school in the LA Unified School District and was an adjunct professor at the USC Rossier School of Education. He has a PhD in physical chemistry from Stanford. Fun fact about Bruce: he created the Wanda Austin STEM Endowment with Dr. Austin near the end of her tenure as Aerospace Corporation CEO, which Heydy and Ashley are both recipients of. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to you, Lael, to get us going.
So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Dr. Janousek and Dr. Mayo for being on our panel today. We are going to get into a really important topic because, as you all know, STEM education is a critical component to the space enterprise. And we want to talk about how we can contribute and evolve the way we encourage interest in education in STEM with our students. So before we get into all those details, I was hoping that maybe Dr. Janousek could share with us how he became interested in obtaining his degrees and pursuing a career in physical chemistry.
Well, thanks, Lael. I obviously grew up in a slightly different era, but I had that gave me some advantages and disadvantages. First of all, as a purely personal note, my family kind of disintegrated when I was young, and so to me, doing well in school was seen as a way to kind of stabilize my life and give the security that I wanted in my life. But growing up in that era, I had a lot of time to be outside. I had time to be bored, and I also lived in a place that had really interesting weather. So I got interested in weather observations and just trying to understand nature. I also grew up in a time where we were in the middle of a Cold War and a space race, and there was a lot of emphasis on science and math. So I had a lot of resources available to me in the local public schools outside of Chicago. And the final piece of this puzzle for me personally is I was able to get a scholarship and go to a small college in Iowa and get a lot of kind of hands-on attention from professors and be able to work in a laboratory and understand what science really was like. And that prepared me for graduate school and I think cemented my interest in the topic.
Thank you. Dr. Mayo, would you share your journey, how you became interested in mechanical engineering and then aerospace engineering from your early STEM education days?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Woods. So growing up, I just remember kind of tinkering with things with my dad and my siblings. I'm one of seven kids, and I just remember actually working on a perpetual motion machine with my dad. And at my young age, I did not know that perpetual motion was something that couldn't be achieved. So my dad and I actually worked on it for days and days, and it got pretty. We got pretty. Pretty good at it, right? Like it started to run for quite a long time, kind of reducing as much friction as we could, but eventually it would stop. But I think that was maybe some of the early parts, like when I was very young, for an interest in understanding how things work, and also for pulling things apart and digging into asking the question why. But as I went through high school, I actually didn't really have a whole lot of interest in STEM. I was really focused on sports. I was really big into junior ROTC, Army ROTC, and excelled there, and fully had the intentions of serving in the military as a full career to retirement, and finding some way to continue service and contributing in that way. My dad served in the Army for over 25 years, retired Army, so I saw that as a path for myself. And though I did Army Junior ROTC after high school, fully expected to kind of go into the military. So I did that and ended up in the Marine Corps just to be different from my dad, and also to do something different than what I'd seen within kind of the Army training that I'd gotten in high school. So I actually became what was designated to be a 0351, which is infantry assault marine, right? Like it's infantry, but by some change of fate, I ended up becoming a combat engineer. So that's a 1371 in the Marine Corps, and it's just not your traditional engineering, but it focuses more on being creative with battlefield prep, mine detection, making it easy for you to attack the enemy and hard for the enemy to attack you by doing, kind of land survey, building bridges and those types of things, but still just kind of focused in those areas. But while in the military and being deployed in different places, I still had that curiosity for at least how some of this vehicle systems and some of the mechanical systems that we were using, how all those things worked. So after I finished my time, at least initially enlisted, I wanted to become an officer. So going to college was a thing for me to become an officer. So what I did was I went to Virginia Military Institute and was either going to choose a business degree for, kind of the focus on leadership, or mechanical engineering as a backup to the military focus that I had before. The backup became the primary because, I really jumped into the mechanical engineering piece and really was excited about it. Still had interest in service and joining the Marines, but ended up going on through the master's and the PhD, focusing from mechanical engineering to aerospace engineering, and a master's for solid rocket propulsion, mainly focused on missile research, and then wind tunnel testing in the PhD. So my interest really kind of came, at least for aero, came out of riding around in helicopters, seeing some very, very cool aircraft acrobatics, right? Like fighter planes doing some things that I just really did not believe that they could do that, or that a machine could do that. And I really wanted to understand how that worked. So that kind of pushed me in that direction, and I just kind of wanted more and more, and along the way kept on digging into it. So that's how it started for me, and still is going today.
Wow. Some very different journeys, really exciting. So before talking to you, I had the pleasure of speaking to two former aerospace interns, Heydy Arias and Ashley Carpenter. Ashley is an undergraduate at UCLA, and Heydy is a graduate student also at UCLA, learning to be a math teacher. So I have some clips I'd like to share and to get your thoughts on. So if we could cue up the first clip from Ashley.
My freshman year physics teacher was absolutely amazing. And what made his class so fun and engaging was that we had so many hands-on projects. We had like the creative ability to make things happen the way we wanted as a team. And these projects were really fun. And Personally, my favorite project from that year would have to be Pinhole Photography, where we essentially made a camera from a shoebox. We built a compartment for the photographic paper, poked a tiny hole in the other end of the box, and headed outside to different parts of our school that we felt were beautiful enough to take photos of. And this project was amazing. There was a lot of trial and error, getting photos developed well, trying to figure out our specific exposure time. We had this like little janitor's closet that my teacher converted into a dark room with red and orange lights so we could develop the photos. And yeah, unfortunately I don't have these photos anymore, but it's one of my favorite projects that I've ever had to do.
So Ashley, who's now a sophomore at UCLA, is studying astrophysics. And what struck me about that story was how her freshman year of high school physics teacher gave her and her fellow colleagues and students an opportunity to work together on a really, really challenging problem. Really interesting, a very simple problem statement, take a picture, but really a complex solution to actually build a camera and figure out how it worked. So I want to start with you, Dr. Janicek. What are your thoughts on Ashley's story, and how does that fit into the style of teaching that you encouraged your students at USC to use in the field, and your experiences as a fourth grade teacher as well?
Well, there's compelling evidence that project-based or inquiry-based learning really enhances student engagement and learning. And Ashley's example is a good one. There's a lot of things embedded in her comment there that I want to point to. One is that there was some trial and error, there was some struggle, and this is an important component in engaging students, is to give them a problem that's within their grasp, but not trivial. And the pinhole camera is a good example of that. Also, it involves some what I call sociocultural learning, where students were working as teams, they were sharing expertise. They were actually doing things with their hands, and in some cases, students are better in that environment because they're better with, as David said, with this tinkering. Some people are better at building things and constructing things. And the final thing I'll mention in a classroom like that is that the teacher has given up some control. It's turned it into a student-centered rather than a teacher-centered classroom. The teacher has posed the problem, given the students some directions, but has not really told them what the right answer is, and forced them to struggle through it. And there's, as I said, compelling evidence in the world of education that this actually helps students develop subject matter expertise on a topic because they understand the problem deeply. And in Ashley's case, they understand the joy of actually discovering something and building something and working through the process.
So there's another component to that project, which has sort of an artistic component where the students were building a camera and then taking a picture, which they were very proud of, as you could hear from Ashley's recount of that. Dr. Mayo, you've shared that you are musically inclined and spend some of your free time playing the trumpet. Can you talk about the connection between the arts and STEM as you've experienced it?
Sure. So yeah, I've actually been playing the trumpet for over 25 years and think a lot about the connection of art and science and the connections there. I actually really appreciate that piece of it because a lot of students think that they have to choose between either the art or the science, and that they have trouble seeing the connections, at least in one or the other. And one thing that I often try to do is try to connect with students where they are, right? Like if their interests are in music and painting and things that are actually kind of considered more artistic, I tell them not to suppress that. Because both are very, very important. So my thought there, as I engage with students, because a lot of actually very, very young students are interested in the artistic pieces, that art and science are our attempts to understand and describe the world around us. So some things that maybe engineering and science may not be able to explain can actually be still interpreted and still useful to look at it through an artistic lens and a creative lens and understand kind of how you can extrapolate out to different ways of actually dealing with a particular phenomenon. How you feel about something is often just as important in some ways as just final result or its impact on the environment. So both require creativity and the need to move towards some outcome. And as I have worked in engineering, we have to take into consideration human factors. And there's an artistic and creative component to understanding if a product will actually be widely adopted by the folks that the product is being produced for. There are many, many examples of how a particular product was engineered or designed in a particular way without thinking about how that product would look in the hands of its user or be used in that way. And I think there's an artistic component to that that cannot be overlooked if you really want to actually have what we create be adopted by an end user. And then also finally, I also use a lot of my kind of personal interests when I engage with students and people in general. The big part of connecting with people is not just saying, hey, like you use some of the products or things that we engineer from day to day, but it's also meeting them where they are. And sometimes that common bond, that common interest is by saying that, hey, I play the trumpet, or I like to sing and I like to dance. And even though I don't do the last two very well, that's something that as human beings, we have a common bond for. So those are good icebreakers in order to engage and get folks to open up, because not everybody has solved a differential equation or tried to understand the Navier-Stokes equations, for example. But everyone has, if they've tried to walk, they've actually tried to dance at some point, and they've heard a song or heard their mother sing to them as a child. They've been able to sing before. So those connections are very important for bonding and getting to open up with people, because if there's no connection and communication, then it's very hard to have that education piece move forward. So that's one part that I wanted to bring up, but I actually really appreciate an opportunity to leverage both the left and right sides of the brain, and when those two come together, some amazing things can happen.
Absolutely. The creativity and innovation is so connected to the interest in STEM and STEM fields. I'm wondering if we could go back to Bruce's comment about the teacher giving up some of the control of the classroom. So to David's point of allowing that creativity to thrive, what does a teacher have to do to enable that for his or her students? And what exactly does giving up power really mean?
So it means that first of all, the teacher talks less and the students participate more. So it usually means that the atmosphere is somewhat chaotic because students are working in groups and trying to, struggle through something and discard, cul-de-sacs in their thinking and argue with each other. And it also requires what I call what academics call mediated learning, where the teacher is coaching and walking around the room and listening and jumping in where it's necessary to provide some guidance. It's a really challenging thing to do as a teacher because, first of all, the students are literally begging you for the right answer, which is hard not to give them. And secondly, if your principal walks into the classroom at the wrong time, it looks like you've lost control of the situation. You're not teaching. You're not behind a overhead projector, as we used to call them. So it requires some trust. And it also, the third thing is it requires the teacher to have real mastery of the subject, because students will come up with a lot of creative solutions to things. In Ashley's case, I'm sure there were people that came up with Pinhole camera designs that were wildly different than anything anyone had ever come up with. And it's up to the teacher to know enough about optics to be able to understand what they're doing, and in some cases encourage those new pathways. So it's a very challenging environment to teach in. It requires patience, expertise, trust in the case of the students, but it pays dividends. And Ashley said she'll never forget that environment, and it's led her to pursue this in college.
Yeah. Well, let's listen to a second clip from Ashley, where she explains the transition from her high school experience to her college experience.
When we think of high school physics and college physics, there is definitely a huge difference. In high school, there's a lot more room for subjects to be hands-on, and in college, it's all pretty much lecture-based. So my experience freshman year of high school with the teacher who gave us a lot of hands-on projects really piqued my interest in the subject. And all of these projects tied everything to the real world and made the math part and the conceptual part easier to handle. And so it's hard to say that I wouldn't still be interested in astrophysics if I didn't have that hands-on experience, but it definitely helped so much. It definitely made it easier to determine that was what I wanted to do.
So Ashley notes that there is a pretty big shift, that it turns into more of a lecture-based style of education when she reached the college level. And of course, she's still very interested in astrophysics and pursuing it. And of course, there's real value into learning of the equations and all the other things that go on with the lecture-based style of education. But is there a room at the college level to continue the model-based inquiry method? And I'm going to start with Bruce on this one. Is there room to continue that? And is that something that you've seen when you were teaching at the college level?
Mm-hmm. So it's possible, but now we start to deal with issues of equity because most places that achieve that are small liberal arts colleges, right? Your physics class has maybe 12 people in it rather than 250. So you're much more like the environment that Ashley was in high school. Those schools are expensive, right? So there are people that are, for example, it's out of their reach to spend, $70,000 a year to go to an environment like that. So it's possible, but it's expensive, and it is closer to what you would find in graduate school. It's a nice bridge to that, where you're actually doing research and creating things. I want to reflect on this a bit more, though, in terms of something called the Algebra Project, which is, and the reason I'm mentioning that is as Ashley's learned, when she gets to higher level physics class, it's basically a class in applied mathematics, as is advanced chemistry and other physical sciences. The Algebra Project was started by Robert Moses in Mississippi. Robert Moses was a civil rights activist, and he is of the opinion that algebra is a gateway to literacy. It's a gateway to STEM jobs, and it should be treated in the same way that we value reading and writing in this culture. And there's a lot of emphasis a lot of resources have been poured into this, especially in urban schools, to allow students to find that toehold in algebra as a way to, as the first step in the process, right? So to answer your question, Leo, yes, it's possible. It tends to be in smaller settings that require a lot of resources. But I think if we step back, we have to ask, how do we allow more people in the front end of the process and give them access at the beginning? And I think the Robert Moses Algebra Project is a really good example of opening that aperture wider to give more people access to even getting to that first step in the sciences.
Yeah, that's a great point. David, I know you spend a lot of time volunteering in the elementary and high school classrooms around you. And I was wondering, something that Ashley says is that she's really motivated by learning about how things work, which is something you've actually shared with me as well and shared earlier in this discussion. How do you encourage the students that you work with to think that way and to continue to explore and learn about how things work, and how to use that as motivation?
Sure. And I've engaged with a lot of students at the K through 12 level, and I see, in connection to Bruce's point, there are a lot of ways to find those connections and opportunities for further developing and growing that creativity and an interest in STEM through some of the kind of maybe even nonprofit or STEM focused initiatives. Right, like so, AIAA, AHS, volunteering at high schools are some of the areas for which I've engaged in. Actually, the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers has a science bowl and science competition, which are all opportunities that I've been able to judge and engage and interact with students. And it's been a very great learning opportunity for those who participate. And it doesn't have to necessarily be students. It just has to be students in a certain grade, but it just has to be a certain age group. So there are many opportunities there that can connect young people to opportunities that can set them on a path to getting further connected even down the road through scholarship and also connections and relationships to universities. But even when I'm talking to students in that arena, right, like even during, kind of the limited time for judging or during a science bowl or a science competition, one of the things I try to do is make that connection of, the physical world to at least an equation or what it is or the physical phenomena that we're studying or that their presentation is based off of. Purpose can be a great motivator. And I think that's where you can lose people in many scenarios when they don't understand kind of where the work is going or what that end goal should be. So purpose is very important. And what I try to do is explain like why it is that certain things work and encourage them actually to kind of even dig into it on their own. We all have a cell phone in our pocket, or at least most people have them. Even there are some older ones, older cell phones, in drawers that are no longer in use. And I encourage students to take those cell phones apart and actually, try to understand at least what the basic components of that particular object are. One of the greatest things that I got the chance to do, at least in one of the courses, was in our machine design class, we actually completely deconstructed a toilet, something that we all use every day. And I actually realized that I did not completely understand how those things work. And it's just interesting to understand and find out, hey, there was thought that was put into ensuring that we have this service, right? Like we have this opportunity to make our lives better in this way. Extrapolating it out into those types of terms where it's where the equations help you to understand the physical world can have a really big impact on student involvement and even just curiosity beyond, right? Like who knows what else we can start to learn about and start to grasp in our connection to others. Also, Bruce mentioned something that I appreciate, and it seems like he's going down the path of, students have many different ways of learning. And for me, I found out kind of late in life, but it was actually always there, but it's that I'm a kinesthetic learner, right? I learn by using my hands. And if you talk to me for many, many hours, the likelihood that I'll retain the information is lower than if I am able to write it down or actually have some actual engagement in the learning process, or at least the education process. So there are students who have different ways of connecting and interacting and engaging with the material that you're trying to get them to absorb. So I try to be very conscious of the fact that I need to maybe present information in multiple ways. especially if there's a larger group. So I just remember that, kind of some of the challenges that I had when when I was younger, and people were, kind of telling me, hey, you should be getting this. I've told you over and over and over again, this equation or this particular concept. And I'm standing there saying, I still don't get it. But when I am able to see or feel it or touch it and manipulate it and work with it with my hands, I'm able to grasp it, and usually even on the first or second try. I know that there are other students out there who have other ways of learning. So I try to show them that, hey, that you may be experiencing the world in a different way than others. And if you can figure out how you can unlock that, use your key to unlock that concept, you can do that. So what you'll see me do in meetings, even today, is write down everything because that's how I can absorb it rather than hearing it once or twice and it still not being something that I can connect with. So that's one piece. But the original question was explaining kind of how and why things work. Just one of the things that I actually really also like to do with young people and just in general is to help them to understand that this engineering piece and the science piece is a way that we actually use to kind of predict the future. For the chair that I'm sitting in, for this webcam, they're all based on some equations and understanding of how the physical phenomena, aphysical phenomena work so that we can interact and engage with each other. So the way that we can better understand how things will react within a certain amount of time, right? The life cycle of a particular thing, or having it to us to engage even through this communication medium, that actually is a prediction of the future that we can use to our benefit. Once they start to see it in those terms, and also think about it from the standpoint of how you monetize it, there's a profit and loss piece to it. Their ears perk up, right? Like, so everybody can actually relate to that piece because in our society there's a profit motive for certain things. Trying to connect with them in those different ways actually helps a lot, rather than trying to tell them over and over and over again the same way, which they may or may not get. So that's been very helpful to me, and I just wanted to share that part. We all learn differently, and we can all gain something and have something to contribute once we get the right keys.
Yeah, and I think that feeds in really nicely to the kind of classroom that Bruce is describing, where people are working in teams and they're hands-on and approaching problems differently, coming up with different pinhole cameras or whatever it is that the teacher has asked them to work on.
I've got PowerPoint presentation. I'm sorry, I have a PowerPoint presentation on how a toilet works that I want to show with David and see how that works for us. So, probably not very well.
Thank you. I love this.
It work for me either. So. That's a great story.
I want to make sure that everyone who decides to go take apart someone's cell phone has permission from whoever's cell phone that is before they do that.
That's right. That's right.
Great idea. I want to turn to the conversation that I had with Heydy Arias. But before I do, Bruce, can you share with us a little bit about the Dr. Wanda M. STEM endowment that you were part of creating? I believe it started in 2016 because Heydy is our inaugural winner of that scholarship. So just to give a little background.
Well, so I was on staff with Wanda near the end of her tenure as CEO, and we were exploring ways to leave a legacy. And as you know, Dr. Austin was passionate about education and about helping to lift people up. And her vision was that if she could direct resources in a life-changing way to somebody. And she'd seen examples of this with Air Force officers or other people that gotten scholarships or fellowships. And she said, wouldn't that be cool if every year we can find a person who we can change their life? And so we created this endowment. The Board of Trustees supported it. And Heydy was the first recipient of this. And she wanted to go to UCLA, and this is one of the company's proudest examples of what we're capable of doing. She's graduated. She's pursuing her dreams now to be a teacher, and we've been able to give these scholarships annually now. And people in the company are donating money. The board is still supporting it, and it's it's a wonderful thing. Heydy, just out of high school from Montebello High, came and met with our board when she won the award. And it was one of the really neat moments in company history to have Heydy show up and say, here I am, and thank you for helping me out, and off I go to college. And she has proven us right every step along the way.
Yeah, so so as Bruce said, she's an aspiring math teacher working on getting her credentials from UCLA. Can we cue up the first clip where she talks about what she does in her classroom?
Yeah, so making math relevant for students is super important for them to view math as important to the world, useful, and it can make them go into different, career paths. I think STEM it's a gateway to so many opportunities for students, opportunities to learn, collaborate, and grow professionally. And so as students, we really have to work hard in fostering that environment. In my teaching experience, when I've taught lessons, I always try to connect a concept that I'm teaching to the real life scenario. And I know this is sometimes challenging. Me, myself, I struggle sometimes to come up with a lesson that is relevant to students and it is about a real life scenario. And sometimes we tend to stray away from doing that because it's hard. But I think what I'm starting to realize that it doesn't have to be like a really complicated real life scenario. Even if it's a scenario that's not very common, then as long as it's memorable and it makes sense, then I think it works. Like I once taught a lesson about the Pythagorean Theorem where students had to figure out how far they had to place a ladder from the tree so they can rescue a cat that was stuck in the tree. So it was something that was not a very common scenario, but they thought it was very funny, that they had to figure out how they can rescue the cat. And yeah, the scenario was memorable. They enjoyed it. And little things like that will help them associate like the Pythagorean theorem to that scenario. Because after that, when I brought it up, 2 weeks later, they still remembered, oh, like, Miss, that was the problem with the cat stuck in a tree. Yeah, we did this and we did that. So hearing those conversations is really rewarding because you know that they're enjoying it and they understood it and that they find it interesting. So I think that's really important.
So I really like her example there of just creating a simple problem with a cat in a tree to teach the students about the Pythagorean theorem. So starting with Bruce, you worked in the fourth grade classroom, which of course, not quite to the Pythagorean theorem yet, but have you encouraged students who have come to you and said that they don't understand the relevance of math and why they need it in the real world? And have you worked with them in creative ways to continue to have them see the connections to math and science?
So I have, although we were talking about creating an environment where students are allowed to struggle and come up with their own solutions. And in math, that's a harder classroom environment than it is in science because it requires a little more subject matter expertise and a little more structure. So Heydy's on her path to finding that. She's in the Master's in Teaching program at UCLA. By the way, she's going to be teaching math in both English and Spanish because she was an English language learner herself. So the answer to your question is yes. How do you find applications that allow students to develop expertise, not lose confidence, and not just give up? One of the things that I wanted to point out is that there's a level of, and maybe David talks about this when he goes in the classroom, this requires an acceptance on the part of the teachers and the students that there's going to be some struggle, and it's going to require some persistence, and it's going to require people to overcome frustration. And a lot of successful teachers come clean with the students at the beginning. So it's okay, if you're playing sports, it's going to hurt, and it's going to be hard the first few practices. You get knocked around and you might be sitting on the bench, but you might, you're still on the team, right? So letting them understand that this is going to be hard and we're all going to struggle through this together. It's sometimes better to kind of be brutally honest at the beginning. But finding applications to the real world is really key. And, in math textbooks, those things tend to be at the back of the problem set rather than the beginning. Those are the so-called application problems, right? So you drill through 100 of those kind of and drill and kill problems. Then you get to the good stuff, and then it's time to move on to the next chapter. And a lot of classrooms now are kind of inverting that, putting the application problems in front. And if the students are engaged, they actually master the content that way faster because it means something to them.
Yeah, I think having it mean something is really key. David, one of the things you focus on with your students that you work with is the component of confidence. And you mentioned that to me, and it really resonated with me because I could relate to being a student learning math and science and struggling with the confidence piece of it. What are some things that you bring to those interactions with those students, and how important is the confidence level of the student?
Yeah, it's very important, and sometimes that has to be built. We actually all have insecurities, doubts, things that we just kind of think that we are, and really kind of focus on our flaws at times rather than the many, many, many things that we do well. So what I often try to do is highlight, remind, and reinforce those things that we have done well, so that they can, start to see that, right? Like I'm not a failure. I really like a quote by Stanley McChrystal. He says that it is important for our leaders to allow the folks that we engage and interact with to become, allow them to fail without becoming failures. Failing is actually going to be a part of life, where that's actually how we learn and how we integrate and interact with the world. We make mistakes. We fall down a lot when we're little kids. And then eventually we start to fall down less and less, and we forget what it was like before we were able to walk. It's almost like we felt like we were always there, but we weren't. And everyone is a novice before they become intermediate, before they become a professional or an expert. So embrace that process. This is how I try to build them back up, is to embrace that process of you're learning something now, and it's okay to not be good at something, but if you're interested and you have a drive and if you're passionate about it, or even if it's just something that you like, it's worth you putting in that effort and time and doing it either for enjoyment until you can do it, kind of maybe as a full-time basis or those types of things. Like, put it into perspective, but you're failing one time is not the end. And you shouldn't quit even at that point. And students have challenges with that. Young people have challenges with that. Adults have challenges with that. Quitting. I saw a quote, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but I'm sure that it can be found easily. If you quitting, at a certain point, it's almost like just throwing the car away when you have one flat tire. We're going to have flat tires. We're going to have instances where we need to fix something and then get back at it. And I think that my time in the military has shown me, right, like through a lot of leadership labs, that you just have a lot of learning to do to get to where you are. And there'll be folks who you can align with. That's why collaborative learning is so important. There are folks that you can align with to help you, who have learned the lessons that you are trying to learn, so that maybe you can skip some of them, but there's going to be challenges, and developing that confidence in that you're learning. A failure is not a instance where you need to quit, but it's an opportunity to learn, and giving that empowering them with that knowledge helps them to move forward. Now, I see the light bulb go off in their minds when they see that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to get something wrong and make a mistake, because the true win actually lies with the person that's persistent, not the person that gets it right all the time. The person that actually can be creative in a solution, because the light bulb, right? Like, this is an example, but the light bulb took many, many tries to get it right. But now we all actually can benefit from that solution. So I try not to throw anybody's idea out of the way, but actually help to develop it, grow it, look at these as development opportunities, or, kind of where folks are at least maybe not where one would think that they should be, but as development opportunities and situations where, we can actually get to the same page, but I don't want to get rid of their contribution, because there's a lot that they can bring to the table, because there may be something that they know, or that they may be an expert at that I'm not. So just that empathy is actually very important for me too. So so just a couple of thoughts on that piece.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to our last topic, which is how we test and evaluate our students in STEM. And let's turn to our last clip from Heydy.
So I believe that traditional test-taking strategies to measure student progress isn't really an effective way to measure their growth and their progress, especially in STEM. Me, myself, I am not the best test taker. And so I definitely do think that along the way, some of the classes that I took, I wasn't able to perform at my full potential because my grade was composed of just tests. And at the end of the quarter, when I reflected, I knew I had learned something. I knew I knew the material, but when it comes to tests, I am just not the best test taker. And a lot of students are. Like, I'm not the only one. As I've worked with other students in K through 12, I can see how when we mention the word test or quiz, like, they just go into panic mode and they break down, and right away they just want to give up, and they get nervous and they panic. And so although tests, there's still a way we measure progress and growth. I think there is other ways we can do that. And as I was talking about before, like making math more engaging with students, encouraging them to work in a group. And so how do we do that as teachers? I think we need to start off by not practicing like the lecture-based style classroom and transition into a more collaborative environment. And there's a lot of ways to go to navigate that. And I think a great way to start with is, having the desk. I mean, it's not possible everywhere, but setting up the desk in a way where they interact with other students, not just that they're working just independently on themselves, because math and STEM, it's not a job, it's not work we do on our own. We work with other people. And so I think by starting there, trying to get students to work together collaboratively, and a way to measure whether they are enjoying it, whether they're understanding it, is if we can see them get exciting about what they're learning about and seeing them struggle. Because if they're struggling, then you know that they're being challenged and that they're trying to at least solve the problem. And so I think if that a lecture-based style to a more group collaborative work environment, I think that will really help foster that setting where students feel comfortable being challenged every day and not being afraid, I guess, of difficult problems, practicing problem solving. That way they can actually practice problems in STEM and try to solve these problems together, and know that not to panic when they are encountered with a challenge, because that's also another issue in the classroom, that students, when they see a hard math problem, they just panic, they break down. And so I think it comes with that, just trying to get them used to learning from each other, learning from their peers, and not always leaning on the teacher, because I think as a teacher, we're there to facilitate the discussion, and students are there to work together and try to solve the problem.
So I'm going to start with David. So Heydy, there's so much in that clip. And one of the things that Heydy brought up was talking about how the students are afraid when they encounter a challenge, specifically tests, but any challenge. And I think that comes down to confidence, afraid of failure, afraid that they don't totally understand things in a way that they can apply it. And as that is a focus for you when you're working with students, how can you tell when their confidence is shifting?
Yeah. So actually, one of the things that I start to see in development is that there starts to be a transition away from fear, right? Like, and I really do think that fear is a lack of information, right? Like, so oftentimes, right, when we're not understanding of something and we actually kind of get an anxiety response to not understanding all of the details of a particular situation. And that can be very almost paralyzing So what I try to do is break down that fear, right? Like get all of the information, all of the data, all of the past experiences, and try to pull that out of them so that they completely understand what it is that they're about to go into. And that's a big part of just kind of understanding and building up that confidence, right? Like completely understanding like what are the scenarios, the contingencies, the things that could potentially go wrong. And starting from the worst, the expected thing that could happen during the test, like a meteor hitting, to, maybe just, you're not doing well on that particular, examination. And I actually started with a lot of test anxiety myself. So I'm had to find ways of dealing with that. But seeing that piece and helping folks to understand through their development how they can better attack those types of challenges, right? Like going into those types of challenges is a big part. And also, one of the ways that I've seen is that once you've given them that foundation of success, right? Like you've done so many things well leading up to here, helping them to understand. Now, all of this takes time, but help them to understand that this is an opportunity for you to show what you know. And there is no failure, right? Like there is, the only failure comes when you quit. And if you are willing to jump in with this challenge or and kind of show what you know here and present yourself and perform, like every athlete does on Super Bowl Sunday or a tennis champion does when they go to Wimbledon, then you get to see how you match up and how you are able to share what it is that you know, at least for evaluation. And if you don't do well, what is the worst that could happen? And discipline and dedication will actually means that if you don't do as well as you would like, you actually have an opportunity to try it again, right? Like you still may need some development. And that's all the information from this particular examination or this challenge gives you. It gives you more information in the areas for which you need to grow and develop. Mm-hmm. So use that, channel that, and focus it in a positive direction so that if this is what you really want to do, you can come back at it and be successful at it, right? Like you could have multiple opportunities and find multiple ways of being creative in how you can execute on your goal. So those are some of the ways that I've engaged and shared my story about test anxiety and going to certain situations and how I've developed confidence in myself and shared it with others. And usually at a certain point, you actually start to see an individual who starts to give themselves confidence, right? Like they start to motivate themselves. And then they're ready to break down walls and take the whole team with them, which is a great thing to see because now they've become their own superhero. And a big superpower is not kind of beating yourself up, right? Like not becoming your own worst enemy during these types of situations. This is it's a marathon. Life is a marathon. And these are little opportunities for you to see how well you're doing on that marathon. You'll win some of them, you'll lose some of them, but they're all opportunities for you to learn and continue to move forward. So thanks. That's one of the things that I look for.
Yeah. Bruce, what are your thoughts on testing, and are there other ways that we can evaluate success in the classroom?
So, what we learn in the science lab is anything that's easy to measure probably doesn't have much value. And in some cases, poorly designed tests are an example of that, right? Yeah. So it's easy to design a test. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to design a good test. And there's people in education that are doing research on designing tests where students actually learn things by taking the test. So we are creating an environment, and partly driven by the state's desire to track how students are doing, creating an environment where we're a little too test happy. California's backed off that some in the last couple of years, but the high stakes testing game doesn't really add a lot of value, and it produces a lot of anxiety. The project-based learning environment gives teachers a chance to evaluate students basically every day on a variety of qualities, right? So we don't call them tests in education, we call them assessments. And those are a challenge because it requires a lot of judgment on the part of the teacher and a lot of data intake along a lot of different planes. You're looking at people with different learning styles, how they do work in groups, how they communicate. But, this is the way the Aerospace Corporation works, right? We don't give people a test every year. We could, right? We could give them a written test every year. How's the Air Force structured? Where do we get our money from? What's our relationship with Congress? How do we get a satellite up into space, right? You could ace that test and be a horrible employee, right? We're evaluating people every day in a project-based learning environment. So it's better to have students evaluated along those planes in a classroom early on. And it causes fewer students to become discouraged and disenfranchised also, because they're being, I think, assessed more fairly. And let me give you two examples. One is at Vanderbilt University. Vanderbilt decided in their graduate physics program to kind of throw out incoming GPAs and test scores and look at other qualities like persistence and overcoming hurdles. And it opened up the aperture for a whole new set of graduate students that normally couldn't get into graduate school and get an advanced degree, because not everybody has the advantages of going to not having to work while they're in college, or having personal situations that allow them to excel in what I would call conventional measures. The second is you've probably noticed that a lot of colleges are just going away with SAT scores now, partly driven by the fact that SAT scores are closely correlated to your socioeconomic status and not so much your ability to learn or excel in college. So those are two examples of where, by opening up the aperture at the front end, we allow more people in. We're assessing them along a much broader range of qualities, and it will engage more people in the STEM disciplines if we do that more.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you both for your time, and just ask if you have any closing thoughts on how we can continue to encourage growth in STEM fields, especially given our current state where we're not able to volunteer in the classrooms, or teachers aren't able to have the students have those hands-on laboratory activities. What can we do to continue encouraging this growth? And of course, we'll come out of this and have an opportunity to go back to some form of what we had before. But I just want to get your closing thoughts. So let's start with David. Any closing thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that Bruce said just now really caught my ear, and I just wanted to piggyback off of it just for just a second before I jump into kind of the second that last question. But I do see it as two sides of a coin, right? Like there's more that we could do from the STEM education standpoint of kind of giving more access and meeting and having many ways of engaging for different types of learners, and having the testing system to better evaluate the whole person. But then also the other side is the individual that's being tested. And one of the things that I like to do and at least engaging them is that to help them to understand that kind of the testing doesn't mean that they're doesn't indicate who they are as a person. There's a lot more to them, and then kind of better understanding how they can be what they can learn from themselves from being assessed and tested. And then eventually, right, like with the right motivation, you actually want to be tested, right? Like you want to be, and you aren't discouraged by kind of the assessment. It becomes more of a learning experience for the individual to push in a direction that they're wanting to push. So that's another part, and I think that we can do more in helping folks to kids and adults alike to understand, to become stronger, both through in our knowledge and our learning. And to answer your question, Dr. Woods, about what we can do a little bit more, as we're in kind of this pandemic phase and with outreach and connecting with others. I've very much remained connected to a lot of the volunteer organizations that I have been supporting. Many of them have moved to more of a virtual setting, and I've stayed engaged there. One of the things that I'll be doing the next week or two is doing virtual talks to young students at the elementary level through Zoom. And one of the things that others can do is reach out to some of the teachers and school systems and see if there are opportunities for you to share your expertise with people who could benefit from that, like those younger students. I see opportunities both in kind of what we call AIAA and kind of some of the STEM organizations to do those types of things, and I definitely take advantage of them when I can. And then also reaching out to nonprofits and those opportunities and staying connected, and also just being an encouraging voice to somebody who's just having challenges with some of the kind of the virtual learning topics. You can tutor people virtually. You can call someone. You can actually do a lot with things virtually. Actually, you can be even more productive in this time because you can do it from a cell phone or from the comfort of your own home. You actually don't have to drive there. And that can also be done in more of a group setting, right? Like you can do a collaborative volunteer effort where, it can be Dave Mayo and Bruce giving a STEM talk at the Space Policy Show, or it could be anyone doing, kind of taking a friend with them to talk to someone who is in need of help and actually is feeling like they, aren't good at STEM, right? Like it may be something that they have to work at. So those are some ideas that I thought in my head, but I'm sure Bruce has a couple of ideas as well.
Well, first I want to applaud all you're doing, David, to support your community and the people that you're interacting with. It's really inspirational. So thank you for what you're doing. One of the things that we encountered when I was teaching at USC is the teachers we were training were going to go into really challenging urban schools. And the word that my colleagues at USC used was deficit thinking. It's easy to just say, this is too big, it's too hard. Our schools aren't getting the resources they need. There are too many students that just are dropping out and aren't getting engaged. And it's hard to work against that. But we have to do what David's doing, which is to kind of treat it as a one-on-one problem. He's got greater reach than that, but literally it requires starting small and dealing with a student or a community or a classroom and working from there. I will point out that the current education system is not ideal because of the pandemic. There are things we're going to walk away from having done this that are going to make us smarter, I think. Some students are actually flourishing in the virtual classroom because they're able to, stop recordings, get their questions answered. The material they're doing is they're able to work at their own pace. I'm not a big fan of virtual learning, but there are going to be elements of this we're going to find we're going to continue because they suit some of our community quite well. The final point I would make is aerospace has a key role here, and we had been doing, and I think continue to do, workshops for teachers and give them real-world applications for their science or math classroom. And that's a very powerful thing that the company is doing, and I'd like to see us continue to do. That's an amazing tool to pass on to classroom teachers so they can make their classroom come alive and have the content that they're teaching be related to the world of space. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Leo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And we're going to hand this back over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Lael, David, Bruce, Heydy, and Ashley. We're so grateful to have you on our show today. As always, you can find us on Twitter at #TheSpacePolicyShow or engage with us on Vimeo using the chat dialog box. A little bit about Space Agenda 2021. I mentioned it on our last episode, but I want to bring it up again. It's really important. So we've created a series of discussion papers called Space Agenda 2021 on topics that are already at the forefront or are likely to emerge in the space enterprise in the next few years. And in addition to highlighting these issues, the series offers a concise background, analyses, and options to aid government decision makers, industry leaders, journalists, students, and other parties who are interested in the future of U.S. space efforts. So go to aerospace.org/policy and check those out today. And until next time, take care.